I really was unable to get my head around what I would probably ordinarily have most chosen to speak about. And that is my sort of growing concerns about what is not just on the surface going on upon our world, but perhaps beneath the surface. I'm very concerned about the role and influence of mega global corporations, the whole what's going on in the media, the lack of transparency. I am personally, I'm dubious of any organization, a self-appointed elite of billionaires and corporations, etc., that meet in very exclusive resorts that have some kind of agenda for the rest of the world, aka the Great Reset. These things trouble me. You may have seen, and this is relative to what I will reflect upon a bit, 50,000 farmers in India currently demonstrating against their government because of the role of big corporation in farming, in a country where in recent decades over 300,000 farmers have committed suicide. And to me, what could be more natural?
Yeah, go ahead and open it. Let's see how much it is, period.
What could be more natural than farming?
And whatever's easiest for you.
Don, you need to mute. Go ahead.
Sorry about that, boys.
Paul, I would suggest, and now everybody's almost doing this, but let's all mute when we have a speaker. You'd be surprised how ambient sound and whatever's going on can interfere with the speaker. So we're all going to go on mute except for the speaker. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, well, as you probably know, but over 300,000 farmers in India have committed suicide because of changes in their traditional way of life from big corporations. Another one, of course, I will mention it, Monsanto. To me, what is more unnatural than sterile seed? It's just, it's hard to fathom. I personally, I'm against genetically modified food. To a large extent, anyway. And so in terms of trying to get my head all around that in a sort of presentable way for this reflection, I was unable to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn to my cousin, first cousin, Bill Lloyd, who I did actually invite onto this call this morning. He's in England in the Lake District. Unfortunately, he's unable to do that because he is helping a friend of his move house. But the reason this is an early Christmas present from my parents called One Horsepower by my cousin Bill Lloyd, who in the 70s, they spent 7 or 8 years working with just a horse in the woods and forests of the Lake District. In the 70s is facing very similar sort of recession in Britain. And so let me get straight into it. I'll begin by reading a couple of his own quotes at the beginning, or not his quotes, but what he uses in the book, and then I'll get to what I'd like to read. Because to me, this gets back, I think this is something that we're greatly missing or are losing, in danger of losing from our very corporate, sterile world. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Henry David Thoreau from Walden. And another one from Jack Kerouac, The Dharma Bums. See, the whole thing is a world full of rucksack wanderers, Dharma bums, refusing to subscribe to the general demand that they consume production and therefore have to work for the privilege of consuming all that crap that they didn't really want anyway, such as refrigerators, TV sets, cars, and general junk you finally always see a week later in the garbage anyway. All of them imprisoned in a system of work, produce, consume, work, produce, consume. I see a vision of a great rucksack revolution, thousands or even millions of young Americans wandering around with rucksacks, going up to mountains to pray, making children laugh and old men glad, making young girls happy and old girls happier. All of them Zen lunatics who go about writing poems that happen to appear in their heads for no reason, and also by being kind, and also by strange, unexpected acts, keep giving visions of eternal freedom to everybody and to all living creatures. And now I'd like to read, this is, he's describing an experience in one of the woods in the Lake District, as I say, where he worked with his horse for 7 years, cutting down trees and pulling them out. This is in a wood called St. Croix. On my first job at St. Croix, I experienced something of the mythic nature of logging with horses, something subjective, possibly romantic and idealized, but grounded in the material world. Ideologically, I aspired to be a part of a natural, self-sustaining ecological cycle, and I became fascinated by the relationship between the ideology, the craft, and the science, between philosophy, intuition, and logic, and with the basic physics at the heart of it all. Horse logging also became a political matter concerning the ownership of the land and the trees, the relationships between the owner and the contractor, between capital and labor, and the nature of the power needed to harvest a crop of timber. At St. Croix, I began to see the woodland not as a commodity or a production line, but as an other world, an other plane, like another planet, where I had to learn new rules and new ways of being. Working in the wood convinced me of the impossibility of owning natural processes and made me realize that ownership is a legal fiction, accepted as true, but in reality impossible. I developed a subconscious understanding about the relationship between living matter in the form of timber, energy in the form of horse traction and sunlight, and space in the form of the woodland. I could not express it as a mathematical formula. My language was inadequate to describe it exactly, but I recognized the inability of human consciousness to grasp the infinite complexity of the natural world. I discovered that some of the essential facts of life, the growth of the nature of growth and the miracle of the harvest, lie beyond the reach of words, accountancy, and economics in a different miraculous dimension. After the ice ages, before any trees appeared, the space above the ground at St. Croix had been just that, empty space. Trees seeded themselves or were planted. Trees grew, time passed, and the empty space became solid matter in the form of 80 cubic meters per hectare of heavy timber. The highly evolved and sophisticated chlorophyll molecule used the photon energy of sunlight to provide food for self-replicating cells of DNA by making oxygen and glucose from carbon dioxide and water. That seemed to me like some kind of miracle for a start. I was employed to harvest that miraculous stuff, pull it out of the chaotic wildness where it had grown by a process beyond my comprehension. I converted it into a saleable product, stacked by the roadside to wait for a lorry to take it to a factory, where it would be processed into newsprint or chipboard, or maybe roof beams or toilet paper. The woodland became empty space again. The living mass was harvested and moved. One space was created and another space was filled. Even after the trees had been hauled out of the wood, the logs retained their miraculous otherworldly character in my mind, a miracle of photosynthesis and evolution as much as a valuable commodity and feedstock for our industrial systems. That insight into the natural world gave my work and my life a meaning beyond mere production. The insight revealed part of what is really happening when we harvest the generous nature of woodland, and how sustainable harvesting practice is linked to the intuitive and instinctive relationships we have with the land. The ownership of land gives legitimacy to the ownership of the harvest, and the value of my stacks of timber could be easily stated as numbers, as cubic meters, or tons, or products, or money in the bank. But the meaning of the timber, its true and original nature, the essential reality of the log, was not made up of numbers, or products, or money values, or even of any words, except perhaps miraculous logness. Words and numbers are mere symbols, and the word log is, of course, a word, not a log. The whole forest is other, part of another realm beyond language, and which for millennia has been understood in folklore and religion as a place of adventure, romance, danger, sanctuary, and enchantment. A log dragged out by a tractor becomes a commodity, plain industrial feedstock, as soon as it reaches the roadside. A log dragged out by a man and a horse, flesh and blood and bone, can remain a miracle, a wonder of nature, with a special meaning, even if only for the horseman. The true value of timber production, for me, was the miraculous, bountiful transformation from empty space into solid matter through time, a transformation which could be repeated over and over again by photosynthesis and the energy of the sun. When I looked at a stack of wood with this insight, I did not see a product, but an awesome manifestation of the same life force and pure energy which created the horse and the horseman who then harvest the miraculous bounty. All the pieces of the jigsaw were manifestations of the same energy, the same natural forces reproducing themselves over millions of years of slow evolutionary change. Tree, horse, and horseman are part of one family, like distant cousins, all variants of the same extraordinary life form that is the DNA molecule, about 35% of which humans share with trees, and about 80% of which we share with horses. Guided by the signposts from Gary Snyder and Satish Kumar, St. Croix taught me a childlike wonder of life itself, at life itself, and how precious is the life, and how precious the wonder. Using horses instead of tractors allowed me to preserve that wonder, that sense of fragility, of harmony, balance, and communion. Horsepower led me to believe that if we honor and respect that life force and those natural processes, we may not be as productive, but our lives might be given new meaning, and we might at least endure as a species. Maybe if we have a right relationship with the land, we might preserve our self-respect as well as our planet. I'm going to stop there, but I'm sure you get the drift.
Thank you, Paul, very much. Obviously, eloquence runs in your family. People are asking the title of your brother's book.
Cousin, one horsepower.
Cousin.
My cousin, Bill Lloyd, my cousin. There he is with his horse.
And the full title of the book?
Underneath, Logging in the Lake District, 1977 to 1984.
Wonderful. Thank you.